You don't wake up tired. You wake up predicting how the day ends. The screen lights up before the thought. The body gets up, but the decision didn't come with it. There's a plan. There's intention. But the day has already started on autopilot. You were here yesterday, and the day before yesterday, and last week. Nothing went wrong. And yet, nothing changed. The strange thing is this. There was no fall. Just a deviation too small to warrant blame, and repeated too often to be accidental. This video starts exactly there. Before the excuse. Before the promise. Before you try again in the same way. Like this post if you know exactly what this is talking about. Every day seems the same. You wake up with the feeling that today will be different. Today you'll do things differently. Today you'll persevere. And before the day is over, you already know how it will end. Repeated days don't happen by chance. They're maintained by automatic choices that you call routine. The plan was there, the intention was there too. But at some small, almost invisible point, you got distracted. You opened a tab. You picked up your phone without realizing it. You delayed for 5 minutes that turned into the rest of the day. It wasn't the delay that ruined the day. It was the silent agreement made there. At night, the familiar ritual begins. You mentally review what you promised, what you didn't do, what you would do if you had more discipline, more focus, more strength. And then comes the guilt. Guilt works because it looks like punishment, but it acts as permission to repeat the behavior. Not dramatic guilt, silent, adult guilt that doesn't explode. The kind that just settles in and weighs you down. You don't feel rebellious, nor undisciplined in the classic sense. You feel weak, and worse, repetitive. Repetition without revision becomes a toxic identity. Tomorrow, you try again. And that seems like a virtue, but it also seems like a punishment without an audience. James Clear observes that what is repeated daily doesn't just build results, it builds identity. And that's where things start to get tough. Because each failed attempt doesn't just become a lost day, it becomes more evidence against you. You start to see yourself as someone who starts but doesn't follow through, who promises and then disappears, who understands everything but doesn't execute. And the more you try to push yourself forward, the more tired you become. It's not physical exhaustion, it's the wear and tear of constantly monitoring yourself, of needing to convince yourself every day, nobody sees this effort, nobody sees the internal negotiation before giving up. Only the final result appears. Nothing has changed. And you don't ask yourself why the day seems the same. You ask yourself why you are like this. Guilt becomes an easy explanation. I failed. I can't sustain it. I always go back to the same place. But at some point in this repetition, something is wrong. This issue isn't about you. It's about the method you've been protecting for far too long. Not with you, with the fight you're trying to win. Because if it were just a lack of willpower, it would have already worked. If it were just laziness, it wouldn't hurt so much. The problem is something else. You're trying to force-beat a system that was designed to save energy. And he's still proud to keep going into the same fight, tired as before. And every night, when you silently curse yourself, the game is already set up again for the next day, waiting for you to wake up, believing that this time it will be different, without realizing that the same mechanism is already in motion before you even open your eyes. There is a silent error in the way you interpret this cycle. You call something that is basic, functioning a personal failure. The brain wasn't made to take you where you say you want to go. It was made to keep you where you already are. Safe, economical, predictable. It's not an enemy, but it's also not an ally of your future. The brain operates on economy, not ambition. It doesn't care who you want to be in 6 months. It responds to the present, to the least possible effort, to the already known route. When you decide to change your life, you don't activate an internal heroic mode. You activate an alert. Because change, for the brain, is risk. It's expense, it's unknown territory. And every biological system tends to protect what it knows, even if it hurts. So when you sit down determined, full of intention, and minutes later find yourself on autopilot, that's not internal betrayal. It's neurological coherence. The problem starts when you try to overcome it through brute force. When you turn discipline into a daily confrontation. When you think you need to monitor yourself as if you were a walking mistake. Willpower wasn't made to be used all day long. Using things beyond their limits is not a virtue. It's ignoring the wear and tear until it becomes part of the identity. It is short, fragile, and reactive, and the more you depend on it, the faster it ends. But you were taught to believe the opposite, that all it takes is wanting more, that all it takes is demanding more of yourself, that all it takes is being harder on yourself. This logic creates a specific kind of trap. You start measuring your worth by your ability to control yourself. And every time you fail, you don't question the method. You question who you are. Discipline becomes morality. Habit becomes character. Relapse becomes proof of weakness. And so the cycle closes. You try to be a better person using the same tools that keep you in the same place. Old tools don't build new versions. They only refine failure. You plan big, execute small, fall, blame yourself, promise to make up for it tomorrow. The brain observes all this and learns one very clear thing. Change hurts and doesn't pay off. So next time, it pulls even harder towards comfort. Not out of malice, out of learning. You're not fighting laziness. You're fighting a system that has learned that effort isn't worthwhile. And as long as you continue to treat this as a lack of character, you'll repeat the same script with more shame and less energy. Because this fight isn't fair. It was never meant to be won by brute force, and while you insist on blaming yourself, the mechanism remains intact, operating beneath your consciousness, just waiting for the next moment when you'll try to be more disciplined, without realizing that the game remains exactly the same. The cycle doesn't happen through big decisions. It reveals itself in small, almost embarrassing details. You make serious plans. They aren't impulses. They are thoughtful, rational promises, well explained to yourself. Waking up earlier, training 3 times a week, studying every day, even if it's just a little. Stop wasting time. In the first few days, it works. There's even a certain silent pride. You start to see yourself differently. Maybe now it will. But something changes quickly. It's not a major crisis. It's a subtle weariness. A feeling that maintaining this requires too much attention. You think about resting just today. Just today doesn't make a difference. Just today you deserve it. And then autopilot kicks in. The cell phone appears in your hand uninvited. Social media is not a choice, it's a reflex. Before you know it, you're already in. By the time you get out, you've lost the rhythm. The next day, your energy is lower. Not zero, lower, and you know it. That's when the most corrosive part of the cycle begins. You avoid looking. You avoid opening the list. You avoid remembering what you promised. You even avoid thinking too much about it. Not because you don't care, but because it hurts to confirm, once again, that you didn't keep your promise. So you curse yourself silently. Lazy, weak, unsteady. These words may seem harsh, but they sound familiar. Almost comfortable. Because they explain everything quickly. If the problem is you don't need to change the structure. You just need to try again tomorrow. And so you enter short-term effort mode, bursts of motivation followed by disappearance. You vanish from your own plans. Vanish from what you said you would do. Vanish from the version you tried to be for a few days. The brain registers this with cold precision. It learns that starting generates expectation. That expectation generates tension. That tension ends in guilt. So next time, it anticipates the detour. It pulls you into comfort sooner. It distracts you before the effort takes hold. Not because you're weak, but because the system has been trained that way. You try to solve it with more demands, with more rigidity, with more promises, but each new attempt made in the same format only reinforces the association. Trying hurts, giving up relieves. And that immediate relief is all the brain needs to repeat. You are not breaking the it's training the brain to avoid anything that requires it is strengthening the standard. Meanwhile, your identity is being shaped in silence, not by the discipline you imagine, but by the script you repeat. And the more you blame yourself, the easier it is to fall again. Because guilt doesn't break the cycle. It only explains why you remain in it. And while you insist on attacking yourself for the result, the mechanism remains intact, running in the background, ready to pull you back into autopilot as soon as you try, once again, to win everything through effort alone. There's a comfortable idea you repeat without realizing it, that deep down, you and your brain want the same thing, that you're both aligned towards a better future. You're not. Your brain doesn't want your future. He wants predictability. He wants repetition. He wants to save energy today, not build something tomorrow. The future demands effort before reward, and the brain hates this trade-off. It prefers the known imperfection to the promising unknown. It prefers immediate relief to distant gain. It prefers the automatic to the conscious. When you say, "I want to change," it doesn't become an internal command, it becomes noise. A threat to the system's stability. That's why the deviation happens even before you realize it. It's not conscious sabotage. It's anticipation. The brain recognizes the signs, the time you usually try, the environment, the level of demand, and it acts quickly. Distraction, sudden fatigue, an urgency that didn't exist minutes before. You think you've lost focus. In reality, it's been taken away from you. Because the brain doesn't work by values, it works by patterns. And the pattern it knows is the you of before. The disciplined self you imagine doesn't exist for him. It has no history, no data, no proof. What exists is the you who starts out enthusiastic and then stops. The you who promises and then backs down. The you who tries to control yourself and fails. That's the registered profile. So every time you try to act like someone different without changing the system around you, the brain pulls you back. Not out of cruelty, out of consistency. Here's the part that bothers me, the one you avoid facing. You're not lacking is faithfully obeying a system that has already proven where it are following a learned script. Every time you force yourself, you reinforce the idea that change is pure effort. Every time you fail, you reinforce the idea that effort doesn't pay off, and the brain learns quickly. The phrase you repeat mentally, "I need to be stronger," is part of the problem. Because strength suggests confrontation, and confrontation is exhausting. You're trying to become someone new without dismantling the environment that sustains who you've always been. You're trying to change your identity using only intention. That doesn't work. It never has. You're not undisciplined. You're just losing a fight that was set up for you to lose. As long as you continue to treat your brain as something to be conquered, it will continue to pull you towards comfort. Every fleeting victory will be followed by a quicker relapse, because that's what he knows how to do best. And the more you insist on fighting against him, the more he confirms that the safe path is the old one. The predictable one, the automatic one. The question that begins to arise, even if you don't want to answer it yet, is another one. It's not, "How can I control myself better?" It's, "Why do I keep trying to change in the same way expecting a different result?" And this question doesn't alleviate anything. It opens up a new discomfort. Because if the problem isn't strength, or willpower, or character, then what you call discipline may be hiding a bigger trap. A virtue transformed into a burden, which you carry thinking it's maturity, without realizing how much it keeps you exactly where you are. There's a virtue that you've been praised so much that it's become a prison. Responsibility, maturity, discipline. You learned early on that being an adult means enduring, that where there's a will, there's a way, that you can't rely on motivation. So you internalize this as your identity, to be someone who demands a lot from themselves, who watches over themselves, who doesn't allow themselves to fail without internal punishment. On the outside, this seems like strength. On the inside, it's exhaustion. You treat discipline as character, as if maintaining habits were a moral test, and each relapse becomes a stain on your inner image. The problem is that virtues, when they become a constant obligation, cease to serve their purpose. They begin to drain you. You don't ask yourself if the method works. You ask yourself why it didn't work for you. This creates a specific kind of blindness. You insist on control because you believe that letting go of it is weakness. But excessive control is just another form of fear. Fear of losing what little sense of order you've built. Fear of admitting that demanding more of yourself hasn't gotten you where you wanted to be. Fear of dismantling the narrative that simply being firmer is enough. So you tighten your grip, make harsher rules, promises more rigid, and the brain responds as it always does to prolonged rigidity by seeking escape. The more serious you become, the more your automatic instincts kick in. The more you try to be flawless, the more appealing comfort becomes. You call this self-sabotage, but it's a reaction. The virtue of discipline, when isolated from its context, becomes an elegant trap. It keeps you busy trying to fix yourself instead of questioning the system. You believe you're failing because you can't sustain it. But perhaps the mistake lies in sustaining something that demands constant vigilance. Discipline that depends on tension doesn't last. She only alternates between control and collapse. And the more you pride yourself on enduring, the less you realize the cost. The accumulating exhaustion, the loss of center, the feeling of always starting over. You're not being weak when you retreat. You're being human within an inhumane system. But admitting this requires giving up an identity that gave you some value. That of someone who tries, demands more of themselves, and doesn't give up. But insisting on this has a price. And it appears in the same days, in the short restarts, in the guilt that never resolves anything. Perhaps the most unsettling question isn't why you fail so much, but why do you keep calling something a virtue when it keeps you stuck in the same place, demanding more and more effort to remain still while the next move is already beginning to take shape, pressing for a turnaround that can no longer be forced by sheer force? There comes a point when persisting starts to cost more than stopping. You haven't stopped yet. But you haven't moved forward either. You're stuck in a debilitating middle ground, neither giving up completely nor truly changing. And it is here that the most dangerous illusion takes hold, that if you try harder, it will eventually work. The problem is insufficient intensity. James Clear points out that you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And this phrase isn't meant to motivate you, it's meant to cut you off. Because if you keep falling into the same place, it's not a lack of ambition. It's loyalty to a system that pulls you back. You wake up determined, but you wake up in the same environment, with the same triggers, with the same shortcuts to comfort. And then you demand that your mind act as if it were in another scenario, another identity, another game. That's not courage, it's trained naivete. Every time you try by force, you reinforce the pattern that drains you. You teach your brain that change comes with tension, vigilance, and self-attack. It learns quickly, and it responds by avoiding. Here's the twist you might not want to accept. You're not failing for lack of effort. You're failing because you insist on a model that demands eternal effort. Discipline that depends on daily motivation isn't discipline. It's temporary resistance. And resistance always loses to comfort when the environment is poorly designed. The cost of continuing like this isn't just not changing. It's gradually convincing yourself that you are the problem. It's carrying an identity of inability while repeating an inefficient method. You can keep trying the same way. Nobody is stopping you. But observe the price. Observe how many times you've already started, how many promises you've already made, how much energy was spent to end up in the same place. If you're following this kind of cut because you feel something here is touching a painful place, remaining exposed to this discomfort isn't entertainment. It's a choice. Yes, being around when these ideas appear more frequently changes the type of questions you ask yourself. The turning point isn't enduring it anymore. It's about stopping obeying a system that wears you down and calls it virtue. You don't need more strength. You need to stop using strength where structure is needed. And when that realization starts to sink in, something changes. It's not relief, it's real responsibility. Because from this point on, continuing to try the same way stops being bad luck. It becomes a choice. And that choice exacts a daily, silent price, which appears in the same days, the predictable relapses, and the feeling that you're always training to start, never to sustain. When you try to truly break free from autopilot, something strange happens, not inside you, around you. The environment reacts, not explicitly. Nobody stops you, nobody forbids you, but micro-frictions arise, invitations at inappropriate times. Innocent interruptions, small pressures to keep everything as it always has been. People find it strange when you change your pace, when you don't respond at the same speed, when you don't participate in the same cycle of distraction. You feel it in their gaze, in their sideways comments, in the joke that seems light but demands a return to the old pattern. Relaxing a little won't hurt. You're too serious lately. Why all this? None of this comes as a direct attack, it comes as a gentle tug. And that's precisely why it works. Because changing habits isn't just about reorganizing your day. It's about altering invisible contracts. The environment knows you in a certain way. And when you try to operate from a different place, you break silent expectations. You cease to be predictable, and predictability is comfortable for others. Then attempts at adjustment arise, not to support you, but to return you to the familiar place. And if you're still trying to control yourself by force, that weighs doubly heavily. Because now it's not just your brain pulling you towards comfort, it's the world reinforcing the old pattern. That's where many people back down. Not for lack of will, but because of relational strain. Being different comes at a social price. Even if small, even if subtle. You start to wonder if it's worth it, if you're not exaggerating, if you're not becoming cold. And this doubt doesn't arise from nowhere. It's born from friction. The brain loves that because doubt offers an elegant justification for giving up. Now it's no longer laziness, but social adaptation. You revert to autopilot and everything normalizes. Conversations flow, the atmosphere relaxes, and so do you. But something remains unresolved. A feeling of having given in, of having bent over without realizing it. And that's the real cost of breaking the loop. It's not just internal effort, it's losing the old fit. At this point, discipline ceases to be a habit. It becomes an identity choice. You're not just deciding what to do, you're deciding who you stop being. And the environment perceives this before you even name it. That's why it reacts. While you try to change without changing the context, everything pulls you back. Because the automatic doesn't just live in your mind, it lives in schedules, relationships, constant stimuli. Ignoring this is falling back into the same trap. Thinking the problem is within you. It isn't. But dealing with the environment requires something that willpower alone can't provide. It requires accepting the cost of being an outsider for a while, of not fitting in, of enduring a discomfort that isn't applauded. And that's exactly where many people give up. Not because they can't, but because they don't want to pay that price, without knowing if something different is waiting on the other side. There comes a point where it's no longer about habit. It's about who you're being while trying to change. Discipline, the way it was sold to you, seems like a path to improvement. But in practice, it's become a ritual of exhaustion. You don't just fail at doing, you fail at sustaining an identity that has no foundation. Every day seems the same, not because nothing happens, but because the same internal agreement remains active. The agreement to try to change without altering the structure, to demand consistency from a system designed for repetition. Breaking the loop isn't about doing more. It's about letting die a version of yourself that only exists based on constant demands. The one who believes she needs to watch herself to earn self-respect. This comes at a high price, because abandoning that identity hurts. It was built as a virtue, as maturity, as proof that you haven't given up. But perhaps remaining in it is the true act of giving up. Giving up on creating a system that sustains you. Giving up on assuming that repeating the same method is a choice, not bad luck. Some call this discipline. But at its core, it's attachment to the familiar, even when the familiar becomes tiresome. Some readers find this same conflict described from another angle in The Forgotten Agreement, by author Luciana Santos. Not as a solution, but as a record of the moment when persistence ceases to be a virtue and becomes a cost. The pinned comment preserves this trace for those who recognize the weight. What's at stake here isn't productivity, it's identity. Either you continue trying to be someone new with old tools, paying the price of daily guilt, or you accept that breaking free from autopilot requires abandoning the idea that force solves what structure should sustain. None of these choices are comfortable, but only one of them breaks the cycle. The remaining question is not motivational, because motivation was never what kept you stuck. She doesn't encourage, she cuts. Do you want to continue seeing yourself as someone who tries, Or are you willing to endure the discomfort of becoming someone who doesn't need to try every day to avoid returning to the same place? If this question has been echoing, the space below isn't for pretty answers. It's for saying, with raw honesty, which side of this agreement you're still living on, and how much longer you intend to pay this price knowing exactly where it ends.